Last week, for those of you who were here, we were looking at the Acts of the Apostles, the conference in Jerusalem, and looking about the way that they made a huge decision about the Gentiles, about whether they had to be circumcised. We were looking about how they did conflict resolution, how they decided stuff in those days, which was interesting. I just wanted to hone in and read a little middle bit of that passage again for you, because I want to just talk to you for a few moments this morning about what the decision was about, rather than how they made it. And so that's Acts 15, 6. Acts 15, 6. The apostles and the elders met together to consider this question. And after a long debate, Peter stood up and said, "My brothers and sisters, you know that a long time ago God chose me from among you to preach the good news to the Gentiles, so that they could hear and believe. And God, who knows the thoughts of everyone, showed his approval for the Gentiles by giving the Holy Spirit to them just as he had to us. He made no difference between us and them. He forgave their sins because they believed. So then, why do you want to put God to the test by laying a load on the backs of the believers, which neither our ancestors nor we ourselves were able to carry? No, we believe and are saved by the grace of the Lord Jesus, just as they are." So Peter lays the whole thing out at this point, really, in a quite dramatic way. You remember where we are? We've got a lot of the main church in and around Jerusalem are Orthodox Jews who have become Christians. They believe in Jesus, they believe in the cross, they believe all the things we've just been singing about. Don't give them a bad press at this point. But also, because they believe in the law of Moses, they've been circumcised, they believe in everything. And so they're saying, look, if somebody's going to become a Christian, that's brilliant. But Jesus is fulfilling of the law, Matthew 5, none of the law will pass away. And so clearly, these people need the same foundations as we do. They can't just come in and say, well, they're going to be Christians now. And yet, Peter and James and Paul make the case against this. And Peter says, no. Peter says, actually, this is a burden which has been put upon us and which does not need to be on them. They need to keep moral laws, but they don't need to be circumcised and all that stuff. They just need to believe in Jesus. Now, I just want to concentrate on this little word where he says, "Do not let us put burdens," or a yoke, as it says in the older version, "on these people are unnecessary." Why should we do that? It's been heavy enough for us. We found it difficult. Let's not lay a burden on them. Now we need to get what the New Testament is right first before we think about today. It is not saying, hey, we've got the New Testament, we don't need the Old Testament anymore. It is not saying, oh, we did the law then, but now it's, if you believe in Jesus and love your neighbour, that's fine, you can do what you like. St. Paul had trouble with some of the early churches thinking that and told them off in no uncertain terms. That's not what Peter is saying, and that's not what James says just a bit later on. That is not the issue. That is not the burden. In Matthew, isn't it? Put a note in here. Matthew 23, in a conversation which is really about hypocrisy, Jesus says, interestingly, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees are the authorized interpreters of Moses' law. So you must obey and follow everything they tell you to do. Do not, however, imitate their actions. What he's saying is we do not want to burden them with two things. We do not want to burden them with all the added extras that we have added on as a culture over the centuries. Most of those things were introduced in what we would call the intertestamental phase, between the Old and the New Testament. And they added, you will see this, it's all good stuff, I'm sure. An Orthodox Jew could tell you much better than I can and could make good justification for it. But incredible number of laws and habits and traditions and practices and patterns. And it's all good stuff. But Peter says, they don't need this. Don't burden them with that. But more subtly, when it comes to the business of circumcision was under the old covenant. That was the way you came close to God, in covenant with God. We live under a new covenant with Jesus. In other words, we want to make people Christians. We do not want to make them Orthodox Jews. Hear that. It doesn't mean that the Old Testament is not true. It means that not all the Old Testament applies to us. There are, for instance, lots of instructions about what to do if you're a king, or what to do if you're a shepherd, or what to do if you're a prophet. Most of us are none of those things. They are specific to the case. They needed to be Orthodox Jews. They needed to be circumcised. These new Christians did not need that. But if you put those two things together, what these very devout Christian Jews were saying was something like this: we are delighted about all these new Christians, but we want them to be our sort of Christians. We want them to be the sort of Christians that we understand that we all are here in Jerusalem. They are Gentiles, they are Greeks, they are Syrians, they are Turks, they're all sorts of people. That's great, but let's get them together so that they are on a firm foundation like us. And bearing in mind that they were the main church and that they were the devout people and they knew the stuff. And remember that Peter was in favour of this early on. James was in favour. St. Paul would have been one of their chief honchos. He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. This was not an unreasonable thing. That's what they were saying. And Paul and Peter and James said, no. We want these new people to be like Jesus. We don't want them to be like you. And that is a huge thing. Let us not, he says, put a burden on their backs, which we found it difficult to carry. Let's set them free. I also want to challenge you with this, because these injunctions, these many things in the Old Testament and beyond the Old Testament have been channels of grace. No question of it. They were ways through to spirituality, ways through to coming to God, ways of doing things in the temple and the synagogue and all that stuff. Even the dressing up and the tassels and all that sort of thing. It's important stuff. It's saying something. It means stuff. It's important. But rather now than becoming channels of grace, they've become barriers to grace. That's huge for us. Where, in other ways, where does the gospel of Jesus end and where does the bits that we put on begin? And for those Jews, the important thing was to know where the line was, so that the things they'd put on where they were useful, hey, let's go with it. But if it wasn't useful, it goes. That's what we need to be thinking about. We're thinking about the straightforward gospel this morning. We're singing about the gospel. Where does the plain, straightforward gospel end, and where does all the bits I've added on, and where a Methodist church like this has sort of added to it and sort of modified it, where does that start? And if I know that line, then I can say, is that useful? Is that a blessing? Is it a channel of grace? Or has it become a barrier? So I want to say three things. First of all, about the people coming into our church, that we want to come to become Christians. We are involved in mission. We want people to come to know Jesus as we do. And we need to have a heart for that. But I just worry that I want them to become my sort of Christian. You know? Now, this is a great building, isn't it? We're just going to show you a little picture. Paul's doing all the visuals this morning. You've got just this picture. Yeah. This picture would be much better with the new projector. Actually, if we were having a collection for the new projector, this would be a good advert, wouldn't it? But anyway, this is one of my daughters. Goes to this church, all right? And they are worshipping the same Lord with the same gospel, and all the basics is the same. And yet there is virtually nothing in that environment, which is black, has a huge sound system, has a vast light system, has chaos in some ways. That is a totally different environment. I'm not showing you that because I think after last Saturday's conference, hey, we need to be like that. I'm just saying that when I look at that sort of picture, I'm saying, looking at this, you realise how much our Christianity is enculturated in this way. Join us, become a Christian, enjoy Georgian buildings. Hey, great pillars. You know, sort of thing? Follow Jesus and like organs. You say, oh, I'm not saying that, but that's the message. Because you can't get away from that message. Just as here, become a Christian and like going to a disco. You know? There is that cultural thing, whatever church, there is no way you'll get people at conferences giving you the impression you could do Christianity without culture. You know, perhaps if you lived in a cell on your own and didn't see anything and were absolutely silent, you might, but that's not what it is. You've got to have some culture, you've got to understand it. Where does the gospel end and where does the culture begin? That's a great point. I think it's interesting. I mean, the way we do things, instinctively we say, we want you to come and we like you to do it our way. And it tells us in the Bible, for instance, we need to sing songs and spiritual things and all this. That's great, but worship. But the idea that to become a Christian, you must somehow like community singing is bizarre. Most people only sing in the bath or occasionally at football matches or whatever, you know. But hey, come along. And perhaps you like to, I haven't sung for years. Well, now you're going to learn to sing if you're going to be saved. You know, why do I want to say that, you see? And I love it. And we need to do it, but we do it in the encouragement. We say, well, we're doing modern songs here. We are not doing modern songs here. This is not Radio 1. This is not Six Music. But neither is it Radio, whatever it's called, Radio 3, you know. I had a nephew who is a professional saxophonist. He would be a great guy to be a Christian. He is a very Christian guy, actually. But if he came here, a brilliant jazz musician, the message to him is, if you want to be a Christian, we don't do jazz. We don't do jazz. I mean, well, why is that, you know, sort of thing? And this bit about standing up and sitting down, you know. You're all sat down now. Well, I didn't tell you to sit down, did I? But you all sat down because we stopped singing. We've got that amazing habit, haven't we? You know, I found that in some of our other churches. I wanted them to stand up. As soon as the hymn ended, they all sat down. I found, particularly in Anglican churches where there's even more standing up and sitting down, you see somebody new worried about when to stand up and when to sit down. It's not a barrier. And yet there's really good reasons for this in terms of standing up in dignity and reverence and concentration and good reasons, you see. But perhaps it's a barrier. I need to see where one ends and the other begins. When we had this little church in Cyprus, it was an army church and everybody came from all sorts of denominations and particularly from none. It was a nice jolly little church, and without over-egging it, over that couple of years a significant number of young adults became Christians. When they did, I went through the whole conversion thing with them, and then they said, well, we'd like to be confirmed and baptised in the swimming pool. Brilliant. And then I got to the point and said, now, if you're going to become a Christian here, and if we're going to do a confirmation service, you're going to have to become something. You know, and as it's me, you'll have to become a Methodist. Sorry, it's a Methodist service. That's all we've got, you see. 2 years ago, my predecessor had been a Presbyterian Church of Scotland army chaplain. So if you become a Christian 2 years ago, you'd have become a Presbyterian. That is not easy to explain. It's good stuff. You need a church structure. You need something to join. You can't have uncultured Christianity. But it was difficult. And then some of the stuff was right because the service said, you know, you're going to believe in Jesus as your Lord and Saviour. That's good. And then I got to the bit where I said one of the duties in the Methodist Church is to come to the annual covenant service. I mean, that is really good, but it's not in a Bible. I think it is tremendous to be able to get out into the hills with a tent and a stove and a rucksack and get out into the hills and mountains. As a boy living in certainly most of my time in urban Bristol, the way I learned to do that was through the Boys Brigade, which is the best Christian boys organisation you could get. Fantastic. But it's interesting to reflect on getting out into the hills. They were the people with the tents. They were the people with the stoves. They would lend you a rucksack. They had the compasses. They doled it out. You knew about that. That was great. But you had to join the Boys Brigade. So you had to have a uniform. And you had to learn to march. And you were encouraged to be in the band. Now, I didn't mind any of that. But that stood between me and the hills. Good as it was. You know? A few years ago, Jen and I were going to fly to somewhere, I think Italy or something, and We needed to go to the nearest big airport, which was moderate-sized airport, which was Bristol. We got to Bristol. You go to a moderate-sized airport like that, it's all organised so that you can take off. So it's organised so that lots of people can park. It's organised so that they know who you are, so it's going to be secure. It's organised so you can get something to eat and drink before you go, so you can buy a newspaper, a paperback book. It's organised so that you could go to any number of destinations and you go down different channels to get to them. And that's brilliant. Everything is a means of getting you onto the aircraft and getting you on your holiday. But it doesn't work out like that, does it? Just as everything we're trying to do in our church is to bring people to Jesus and to take off in the gospel, we've got all this stuff. But when I get to the airport, because we're all going to park, you can't park anywhere near the airport. So you've got to get on a minibus to get to the airport. When you get to the airport, you've got to, they take you to pieces. You've got to take your shoes off, you take your belt off, everything off. They sort of x-ray you sort of thing. And then, they're sort of trying to tear your passport apart to see if it's real. And by the time you've got through all that, then you get to the retail part. I do not need Max Factor just to get on an aeroplane, And it's organised in such a way as there is no way out. Have you noticed that? It's like a maze. And when you finally get to the gate, then you find that because there's so many gates, it's about half a mile to your gate on a people mover that today is not working. And we finished up running down this endless corridor. I said, Jane, where does this end? Italy? Just take apart our way we do things, and it's all for the good. But does it often not stand between somebody taking off? I need to look at that. And if it's good, hey, we need a security thing so we don't get blown up. That's good. And perhaps I need a cup of tea. When I take everything else out of it, I need them to fly. I don't want to get bogged down. These Jews said, we want these people to know Jesus, and we've got a great way for them doing it. And Peter said, it's so great they will never get through it. Let's think that through. That'd be great. That's a good way to think of it. And then just more briefly, just with our own individuals, the way we organise our own culture as a community, as a subculture, which is quite different. Those Pharisees were brought up to be a race apart. And the Pharisees were all watching one another. That's true. And there was a sense of cultural identity. I mean, you can't walk around with a lot of tassels and bits and pieces unless somebody else is walking around with a lot of tassels and bits and pieces. It's important. And so there's a Methodist subculture, isn't it? Or there's a Chapel Street Methodist Church subculture, which we get used to. And some of it's a burden, but we enforce it on one another. It's called a habit or a tradition. It's the way we do things. And it's all good stuff. I'll give you a couple of examples, for instance. How about volunteerism? When I became a Christian and joined the church, I realised that the main way to serve Jesus was to volunteer to do something in the church. And so you work through various things. And finally, as you can see, having been a local preacher, I realised that the ultimate thing you could volunteer to do was to be a minister. And so there we are. But that whole sort of volunteering, the only professional job in the church. But anyway, but that's true, isn't it? But it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be all DIY. It doesn't have to, it's good for fellowship, doing stuff together. You could have good fellowship, drinking coffee down the town when you were paying somebody else to do the job. That church there, I was horrified when they said, we pay the sound technicians, so we get a good mix, but then they all tithe, so they can drink coffee when the sound technicians are sorting it out. It is an option. You could have, if we all tithe, a property management company that would sort the building out when we were drinking coffee down the road, or feeding the poor, or doing evangelism, or whatever you want to do that might be not main. We don't even have to have a building. But so if you are on a rota that you wish you weren't on, and you feel that you need to be because, like me, you were brought up with duty, and it needs to be done, and we can't afford it otherwise, you think, well, is that what we want a new person to do? You get a new person who comes, who's recently become a Christian. This is brilliant. And we say, well, it's good to have some fresh blood. Perhaps we could get them onto the church council. Which means it will be good to have somebody new on the church council, but it also means we could do with somebody new because we can't get any of the old people to go on the church council. And it's important and valuable, but how did I get into this, you know? How do we do that? The way we work, we had a conference here last week about some of the problems we have in our Methodist circuit, didn't we? But virtually all the problems are caused by us being determined to do it in a Methodist way. And I have had 40 years organising Methodist churches. So that we got too many churches, we haven't got enough money, we haven't got enough people, we haven't got enough preachers, and we soon won't have enough organists. So let's have a meeting to discuss the problems we probably wouldn't have if we hadn't decided to do it like this. So that a new person comes in, is stuck with a lack of continuity, and there's a sense that there might be a financial problem here somewhere around the side. All those kind of things. All churches have their problems, you know. But the subculture, and if we know somebody in our church who is, quote, not pulling their weight, that means that within our sort of Christianity, this person is not playing by the rules. Although this person in relation to Jesus might be playing by the rules. We're looking forward to Christmas. They're putting up the lights in Mousehole already. It must be Christmas coming, I thought. For some of us in the core of the church, as we look at the Christmas programme with all the stuff that's to be done, which is great, which I love Christmas, one of the biggest challenges will be getting the Christmas tree up and getting the decorations up. That's interesting, isn't it? And it's about incarnation, and it's about Jesus, and it's about being saved by the light of the world. And then for yourselves. For yourselves. You see, when he says, we found it very difficult. We found it very difficult. Neither we nor our ancestors were able to carry this. At the heart of this is that I and you, in our own way, we put burdens on our backs that Jesus did not put there. That doesn't mean that, hey, let's let it all go and it's just peace, love and Jesus. St. Paul, for instance, got rid of the tassels, got rid of going to the temple 6 times a day, got away from all this sort of, little bits of herb and all that sort of thing, which were hugely important, but he didn't do that anymore. So he was released, you see, to do something else, like do mission, like be exhausted, like being stoned, like go into jail, like be shipwrecked, like something real rather than just doing something with tassels, you see. The gospel is a freeing thing. Jesus says, my yoke is easy, your yoke. I don't want to do your yoke. And yet, since I became a Christian, the yoke of other things has gone on. It'll be different for all of you. I can only speak for myself. I remember years ago as a young man on a Crusader camp, it just sticks in my mind. Well, it was 4 or 5 of us, probably more than it should have been, in somebody else's car. And it was one of these on South Devon, and the sun was shining, and the car was going fast, and all the windows were open, and somebody started singing, God forgave my sin in Jesus' name, and we all joined in, and it was a great yes, and you think, we know where we're going, we are the men, we are the Christians, we're following Jesus, I've got a lot of yokes since then, I've got a lot of yokes since then. And why is that? Why do we have things and habits that we've added on? Well, because they're good, but because it makes Christianity my sort of Christianity. I was thinking about my prayer list. Think about your prayer list. I've got about 20 people I pray for every day. And that must be good, mustn't it? And yet in that discipline, it means I pray for 20 people and I don't pray for anybody else. Well, I pray for the world, but, that's 20 people in detail and so many billion a bit vaguely. What about if I said to the Lord, you see, I don't need that boundary anymore. It's a bit of a burden. And it doesn't let me do anything. What if I said to the Lord, I pray you bless my family and friends. And the Lord says, I know who they are. You mention them every day. That's fine. And then I pray for 6 people who are faces from the previous 24 hours. Perhaps on a refugee on the television, or some politician in a terrible state, or perhaps somebody on the street I'd seen, or somebody I met in a coffee shop, or somebody I knew was bereaved. I got 6 faces, and they're new every day. I got time to do that because I'm not praying for my 20 regulars. And that's a very interesting thought. But I have put it down, because I was brought up with this, please bless mummy, please bless daddy, please bless. Who told me that? But I got that, and it's good, and it's a good discipline. But hey, I could break out of that and do something else. Not I could break out of like that. People say, I don't have a quiet time, so they don't pray at all. But so I could stop doing something which is my sort of spirituality and doing something which is much more interesting. It's good for our spirituality, and this is a Hebrew thing, to worship physically. It's good to stand together. It's good to kneel to pray, but not to be told to do it. In a Premiership football match, everybody sits down these days until somebody scores. And you see the whole crowd, you see it on the television, the whole thing goes, and everybody stands up. Can you imagine what would happen if halfway through the match it comes over the loud hailer, and ladies and gentlemen, we'd like you all to stand now because in a moment someone's going to score. Let's all stand. Because in a moment, God's going to bless us. What about if we were singing some songs and when you thought, yes, then you stood up? What a great thought. The Spirit comes through and it's like a sort of, Mexican wave. What a great thought that would be. And so on and so forth. So I'm freed up to do something else. I'm freed up for this. And I'm thinking, that is interesting, isn't it? I'm freed up. And I would just encourage you this morning to look, where does my Christianity end and where do I begin? Because if I want my Christianity to be my sort of Christianity, I want it to be challenging, but I want it to be my sort of challenging. So, for instance, with me, I want to be challenged by new ideas, new strategies, new music, new church growth. I do not want to be challenged by the people sitting on the street in Penzance, because that's not my sort of challenge. So that the band here, they will be challenged by all that they do about music and worship and what keys it in, all right? And they may not want to be challenged in something else, you see. And the caterers, they are deeply challenged by catering, but they do catering, it's their sort of challenge. Well, if you design your challenge, it's your sort of Christianity, isn't it? These Pharisees had lots of challenge. I wouldn't want to do all they did, but it was their challenge. So it's my Christianity, my kind of church. I want people to become like my sort of Christians. We want to be a subculture which is good, or it might be, or it might not be good. Because at the end of the day, I want Jesus to be my sort of Jesus. I want him to be white, middle class, have good table manners, and not sing flat. And who's in charge if I've got my Jesus? What a freedom it is. We read in Acts, and when this letter went out, there was enormous excitement and joy in the church across the New Testament and across the Middle East. Wow! Now we can just believe in Jesus and be thrown to the lions. No more tassels. I just leave you with this thought. Various times, at least a half a dozen times, I've been sort of doing the coastal paths, and you come down and you look down on one of our massive great bays with one of our massive beaches. And some of them are, several miles long, aren't they? This amazing sand, you see. And in the middle, or somewhere near the middle, about 50 yards apart, there are two flags and a Land Rover. This is the safe place to swim or to surf. And there's always people crammed in there. It's a slightly surreal view, actually. About 5 miles of empty sand, all these people in the middle, And it's good because it's safe. Come on. And Jesus just says over your shoulder, "Psst, it's my beach." Actually, they don't know it, but the whole lot is safe. Don't worry about the flags. Just get out in the water. I think it'd be good if where do you come from as a Christian? Where have you been putting the flags in? Is that where Jesus would put them? Or is it where you've got used to it? As a church, making Methodist Christians? Where we put the flags in. Where's an individual if you hem yourself in? You know? Hey, it's all mine. It's all mine. Come on, let's do it.